And now, a passage from The Founding of Milwaukee. The first white visitor to Milwaukee was probably the Jesuit missionary Jacques Marquette, who coasted by the locality on his way to Chicago in 1674. The Jesuit Allouez and the adventurer La Salle may also have seen Milwaukee, and it is said that St. Cosma, the Recollect missionary, touched there on his way to Chicago in 1699. Then comes a lapse of nearly a century, when Milwaukee became definitely marked as a trading point. In James Gorrell's journal, under date of 1762, we find a reference to the existence of an Indian village and the presence of an English trader. A French trader is reported there in 1777 by Gautier, and by Samuel Robertson in 1777 and 1779. Robertson gives him the name of Morong. After that, traders seemed to come and go continually. Notable were Alexander Laframboise in 1785, Antoine Leclerc in 1800, Joseph Laframboise in 1802, and Thomas G. Anderson in 1803. The first substantially permanent settlement was doubtless made by Jacques Viot, who came in 1795. Shortly after him, probably in 1798, came Jean-Baptiste Mirondeau, or Morondeau, a blacksmith by trade who entered Viot's employ. There has been an attempt to weave a romantic story about Mirondeau, but Buck, in his History of Milwaukee, has established conclusively that Mirondeau was a wanderer, lacking strength of character and ability, and that he brought no force to the development of the community. Viot built for himself a dwelling in a warehouse and virtually made Milwaukee his home, living there in winter and making it the center of his summer trading excursions. He was away from Milwaukee in charge of a post at Portage for 2 or 3 seasons, from 1797 or 1798 on, but then he returned to Milwaukee and remained there certainly over 20 years and probably considerably longer. Solomon Juneau settled in Milwaukee in 1818, and the following year bought Viot's trading post. At that time, he was already married to Viot's daughter Josette, so that his relations with Viot were necessarily close. Viot, however, soon resumed trading, becoming the agent for a time of Michael Dousman of Chicago. Peter Juneau, a brother of Solomon, also came to the locality, and he, as well as Solomon, established homes on the east side of the river about the site of the present Pabst Building. Viot's house was located near a little Potawatomi village on the south side and what is now the corner of Florida Street and 17th Avenue. Meantime, the community at Green Bay was growing southward, and in the course of travel from Green Bay to Fort Dearborn, now Chicago, Milwaukee was occasionally being heard of. We know that Ebenezer Child was there in 1821, and again in 1827, and that this latter year John H. Fonda likewise visited there. Doubtless other travelers touched there from time to time. The lead mines in the southwestern part of what is now Wisconsin were in development, and the story of the Black Hawk War, combined with current tales of mineral wealth, was bringing the country west of Lake Michigan into prominence. At the same time, the federal government was steadily progressing in the acquisition of lands from the Indians and in the extension of the public survey and the opening of the new lands for settlement. By a treaty concluded at Washington February 8, 1831, and proclaimed July 9, 1832, the Indian lands north and east of the Milwaukee River were ceded to the United States, and by a treaty made at Chicago with the Potawatomi and other tribes on September 26, 1833, although not proclaimed until February 21, 1835, the United States acquired all the remaining lands of the territory west of Lake Michigan. The treaty gave the Indians the right to retain the lands for 3 years, if they so desired, but surveys were actively entered on, and very soon after news of the treaty, settlers began to come into the district in anticipation of the government's sale of lands. It must have been readily apparent to anyone who considered the situation that somewhere on the west shore of Lake Michigan a large city must be established to furnish the connecting point from the lake waterway to the interior. John Farmer's map of the territories of Michigan and Wisconsin, published in 1830, showed the Milwaukee Bay and Milwaukee River with a notation that a Potawatomi village and 2 American families were there, and this gave perhaps the first public information as to the desirability of this site. However, the first person who definitely seized on the idea of making Milwaukee a city appears to have been Morgan Lewis Martin of Green Bay. Michael Dousman agreed with Martin to share share any purchase for a town site on the Milwaukee River, and Martin came to Milwaukee in July 1833 to explore the harbor facilities. He then surveyed the outlet of the river and made a map of the vicinity in which he showed the direction of the river, the location of the swamps, the Potawatomi village, and the houses of Yo and the two Junos. He evidently very quickly matured his plans for a city, and he made a bargain with Juneau by which they were to share equally in the development of the town site, Martin in fact representing Dousman as well as himself in this transaction. The date of this agreement is given as October 1833, and this is strongly corroborated by a very interesting letter recently discovered at Green Bay by Dr. Thwaites, written by Juneau to Martin on December 1st, 1833, in which Juneau acknowledges receipt from Martin, who is then in attendance at the Legislative Council at Detroit, of a letter written by Martin November 1st, 1833. In this document, Juneau outlines the work he is doing in making improvements on the west side of the river, in addition to those on the east side, with the evident purpose of establishing his right to preemption of the entire quarter section now forming part of the lower 7th, 2nd, and 4th wards of the city. Martin and Juneau acted in full and friendly accord, but Martin was the directing spirit of the enterprise. His projected town must have been steadily in his mind, for we also find among his papers a power of attorney given to him March 2nd, 1835, under which he is authorized by Sheldon Thompson, D.G. Jones, Charles Townsend, and others to purchase lands having an extraordinary value above mere farming land, and evidently having reference to this Milwaukee town site. Among others who had their attention directed to this locality was Micah T. Williams, Surveyor General of the district and resident at Cincinnati. He appointed Byron Kilburn to survey government land in Wisconsin, assigning him to Green Bay, and Williams suggested to Kilburn that when going from Fort Dearborn to Green Bay, he be on the lookout for a location for a desirable town site. The date of this interview is not known, but probably it was early in 1834. Williams received his appointment in 1832, but it was not until 1834 that Kilburn first visited Milwaukee. Major Charles H. Williams of Baraboo, a son of Micah T. Williams, states that Kilburn wrote from Green Bay that a city would be located either at Green Bay or at the mouth of the Milwaukee River, and probably at the latter location. However, a letter written by Kilburn for the first number of the Milwaukee Advertiser, July 14, 1836, shows that the first visit to Milwaukee which impressed him was in November 1834, when he stopped there on his way from Green Bay. In this letter, he states that the land was being surveyed, that attention was being attracted to it by reports of surveyors and others, and that immigration commenced that winter, apparently 1834 to 35. Kilburn himself did not settle in Milwaukee until the following year, 1835. Even before Kilburn's visit, settlers had begun to arrive, and a sawmill had been built. In April 1834, the settlement had become prominent enough to excite comment and a prediction of future immigration from the Green Bay Intelligencer. Thus, while it is no doubt true that Micah T. Williams and with him Byron Kilburn foresaw the possibility of a city on the west shore of Lake Michigan, and that Kilburn subsequently concluded that the mouth of the Milwaukee River would be its site, still we must bear in mind that well before Kilburn's first thought of the subject, and certainly a year before his conception of Milwaukee as a town site, settlement had already commenced. Martin had surveyed and mapped the locality, had made a definite bargain with Juneau with a view of establishing the town site, and had directed Juneau's work of perfecting his title by preemption. In the work of opening the city for settlement, however, Kilburn undoubtedly soon overtook Juneau and Martin, but Kilburn was only one of many settlers who came to Milwaukee beginning with the years 1834 and 1835. George H. Walker came in 1834 and exploited the south side as energetically, if not as speedily, as Kilburn did the west. Further, Kilburn was not alone in his ventures, and his first west side plat is signed by a number of fellow owners, including Solomon Juneau himself. The dates of the first surveys are necessarily hazy. The first recorded plat of the east side covered 30 blocks. It is signed by B.H. Edgerton as surveyor under date of August 20th, 1835, and was recorded September 8th following. However, the plat must have been in use before this, because earlier in the month, sales of lots by reference to the plat were made. Further, there is credible information that the 4 blocks between East Water Street and the river, extending from Huron to Oneida Streets, blocks 1, 2, 3, 4 in the 3rd and 7th wards, were really resurveyed by Edgerton from an original survey made in 1834 by William S. Trowbridge. Trowbridge's survey was thus fully a year prior to any possible survey under Kilburn's direction, and may have been made even before Kilburn's first visit to Milwaukee. The plat extended from the river to Van Buren Street, and from Oneida Street south to the present Buffalo, then Lake, Street. In the records, it is entitled Milwaukee East Side River, but the proprietor's certificate merely recites that it is the plat of the village of Milwaukee in the territory of Michigan.